Welcome to the second in a series of webinars brought to you by the Parkinson's Foundation and AARP. Today's topic is fall prevention and living safely at home with Parkinson's. Hello, everyone. My name is Adolfo Diaz. I'll be your moderator for today, and I'm the Associate Vice President of Information and Resources at the Parkinson's Foundation. And in that capacity, I have the pleasure of overseeing our helpline team. I have a background in physical therapy and have treated young and older adults in both the hospital and home settings, including several persons with Parkinson's disease. So today's topic is of particular interest for me. For those of you who are tuning in for the very first time, we're so very glad to have you here. This new partnership between AARP and the Parkinson's Foundation is going to help us reach even more people with Parkinson's and their care partners to provide the tools, the information, resources, and the community that they need to live better with Parkinson's disease. So before we get started, there are a few webinar tools and features that I would like to point out. You'll notice at the bottom of your screen, there is a Q&A icon for our questions and answers. This is where you can type in your questions or message us if you're having any technical difficulties. We will try to answer as many questions as possible as we get towards the end of our program during our Q&A session. Right now, I'd like to ask you to open your chat box. There you'll find the link to download the slides on today's webinar. The webinar is being recorded, so don't worry about missing anything or trying to write any information down, and it will be available on demand within 48 hours. All of those who have registered will be receiving an email notice with a link. It will also be available on our website as well. So before we begin, we'd like to take a minute to get to know a little bit about our participants and who is visiting with us here today. So please take a moment to answer the questions below that are going to appear. We'd like to know what best describes your connection to Parkinson's disease. We'll wait just a minute or two to let everyone answer the question. Okay, answers are coming in. Okay, so it looks like we have 54%, a little bit more than half of our audience are persons with Parkinson's, and then about 20% are spouses, and we have about 10% healthcare professionals, and we have some adult children as well, and actually various different healthcare professionals who are joining us as well. Again, we're so glad that you are with us. So right now, it is my great pleasure and privilege to welcome our very first speaker, Rose Wichmann, who is the director of the Struthers Parkinson Center, which is part of the Park Nicollet Health Services, which happens to be also a Parkinson's Foundation Center of Excellence. Rose has 30 plus years of experience as a physical therapist and is involved in educational programs designed to improve Parkinson's disease awareness for patients, family care partners, senior residential communities, home care agencies, and in her spare time, Rose does quite a bit of outreach to rural areas, educating individuals with Parkinson's disease and their families. Rose, welcome.
Thank you very much, Adolfo, for that nice welcome. Could I have the first slide, please? Thank you again very much. Appreciate being here and really excited to help address this very important topic for people with Parkinson's disease. So before we get started talking about falls prevention in Parkinson's disease, I have another poll question for you that I'd like you to answer. I'm wondering how many times you've experienced a fall in the last year. This is probably mostly people with Parkinson's who will be answering this question. If you're a care partner, you may want to address the question relating to your loved one with Parkinson's. So I'm going to give you just a few moments to answer that question so we kind of get to know our audience and know how many times you may have experienced a fall. Go ahead and answer the question, please. We'll give you a few moments. And we can start to see the numbers coming in. They're kind of all over the place, are they not? We have about 26% of people who haven't had a fall at all. I'm particularly glad you're on this webinar because it'll give you some opportunity to minimize your fall risk, while others of you may have already taken a fall, and hopefully you'll take away some good reminders and some ideas to minimize your fall risk in the future. Let's get started with the next slide, please. The subject of balance and falls in Parkinson's, as I said before, is a very important one. Postural instability, which is probably the term you read in textbooks, which really means changes in posture and balance, are primary symptom of Parkinson's disease. One of those 4 primary symptoms. But it's generally not an early symptom of Parkinson's disease. It's something that people with Parkinson's typically experience after they've had Parkinson's disease for a while, mid stages or mid stride, as we talk about the Parkinson's journey. Unfortunately, the changes in posture and balance are the primary symptom that are least responsive to medications that we give for Parkinson's disease. In other words, we do better at treating symptoms like tremor and slowness and muscle rigidity with PD medications, less effective in managing the symptom of postural instability. And so therefore, we need to talk about compensation strategies, rehab therapies, and other things that we're going to discuss today. Falling in Parkinson's disease is really a very complex problem. People with Parkinson's do not fall for just one reason. It could be multifactorial, and it might be a little different. So it's kind of like trying to put together the pieces of a puzzle and figure out what may be happening in your particular situation. We're going to talk about the multiple potential contributing factors now. So let's talk about the next slide, please. So let's talk first about the common walking changes that happen in Parkinson's disease that can increase falls risk. You probably are all familiar with the symptom that's sometimes referred to as a shuffling gait pattern. Basically, that means that the size of the step gets shorter in Parkinson's disease. People tend to take multiple small steps. And when we normally take a stride, we end up on our heel first, we go flat-footed, and then we push off from the toe. A shuffling pattern or a reduced step size makes us land on the ball of the foot, which leads to the drag or the shuffle. That forward momentum can sometimes increase your risk of tripping and oftentimes forward balance loss. So that's the problem we call shuffling. If the size of the step is too short, and the body, the mass of the body, the shoulders and the head become out in front of the trunk and the legs, we develop the second problem, sometimes called festination, or sometimes you may have heard the term propulsion. A lot of people describe it like a runaway train. They feel like their walking speed is going faster and faster as the step size becomes smaller and smaller. That's a problem that we call festination. And it really has to do, again, with the size of the step, oftentimes leading to forward balance loss and falls. You might guess that retropulsion, the third term there, retro generally means backward, and retropulsion refers to backward balance loss. Some of you may have experienced in the neurology office when you go to see your provider that they place their hands on your shoulders and give you a little tug backwards to see what your balance stability is like. That's a test for retropulsion or backward balance loss. Backward balance loss happens more as we raise our arm above shoulder level, if we pull a heavy door toward us, or if we're carrying items in front of the body, we might see more of a tendency to lose the balance backward. And then we have freezing, or some people say fog, freezing of gait. Freezing of gait sounds just exactly what it sounds like. It means that the feet literally feel stuck to the floor. It happens more in certain situations. It doesn't occur with every person with Parkinson's, but when someone experiences freezing, the inability to start, oftentimes this can lead to a balance loss or a fall. And the other walking change we might see is difficulty in turning. Many people say they can walk straight forward and not experience a lot of difficulty, but when they go to turn a corner, it can be very, very difficult. The size of the step becomes short, they may experience freezing, and they may have more of balance loss in more of a sideways kind of motion. All of these are common walking changes that can increase falls risk. Next slide, please. So what do we do about these walking changes in Parkinson's disease? First, we have to understand that automatic motion is different in Parkinson's disease. Once we learn how to walk as a young child, we really don't think about it much, right? It just kind of runs on automatic pilot. When you have Parkinson's disease, your automatic pilot gets turned down or shut off, and it doesn't happen as automatically as it used to. So there are certain things that we can say or we can do that actually helps the brain move, gets us off automatic and into a different part of the brain where we're focusing our attention on movement. So a cue is what we say or what we do that helps the brain to move. So how about a cue for shuffling? Probably the most common one is simply short and sweet, big steps. If you focus your attention on larger steps as you're walking, your heel will come down first. You won't have that tendency for the foot to drag or shuffle, and you'll reduce the risk of tripping and falls. So big steps is a cue that we use for shuffling. If you're experiencing the runaway train phenomenon, we sometimes have to first think about totally stopping the motion and then starting over with the big step. Saying slow down to someone who's experiencing this festination, hurry up, run kind of motion is not particularly helpful. They need to stop the motion. They may need assistance to stop that forward propulsion and then start over with a large step. Cues for freezing can take several different forms. Again, we're looking for something that focuses attention on the movement. Some people can visualize or imagine that there's something in front of them on the ground that they need to step up and over. By experiencing this step over an imaginary object, it allows the body to weight shift and to break out of that freeze. We call that a visual cue. Some people may actually need to see something on the ground. A care assistant might stick their foot in front of the person who's freezing and say, step over my foot. That will give you the cue that you need to get started. Other people respond better. Could I go back to the last slide, please? Other people respond better to what they hear in freezing. They might use an auditory cue. The part of our brain that has rhythm, perceives rhythm in our brain is not impacted by Parkinson's. So counting or clapping or snapping fingers in a rhythmic beat can help with freezing. If someone is experiencing difficulty turning, the best cue, I think, is march. Lifting the knees high as you go to turn a corner can really make that motion much easier to do. Next slide, please. Okay, well, there's lots of other potential contributing factors to falls risk. Let's start with the basics. First and foremost, improper footwear. If you're walking in loose fitting, poor fitting shoes, they are going to increase your risk of tripping, losing your balance, and taking a fall. So check out the shoes and make sure they're safe. Complex medication schedules. It's a proven fact that if someone is on more than 4 prescription medications, they have an increased fall risk. So complex medication schedules, because pills have side effects, may increase your falls risk. What we don't use, we lose. Inactivity or reduction of activity in the general routine reduces your muscle strength and may contribute to falls risk. There might be environmental hazards in your way. It could be something as simple as the coffee table in front of the couch that starts to bring on freezing episodes. It may be a floor clutter of some kind, newspapers or magazines on the floor. It may be pets who like to lay next to your feet and you need to be aware of. So these are environmental hazards. Parkinson's disease can cause lowering of blood pressure, and the pills we give you for your Parkinson's can lower your blood pressure further. Low blood pressure can cause dizziness or feeling faint and add to fall risk. And vision is also impacted by Parkinson's disease. People may experience more changes in their vision, in particular in their contrast sensitivity. The retina of our eye needs dopamine. And if you don't have enough dopamine in your brain, you may have more trouble in shadowy or darker spaces in really determining light and dark. Thinking changes can happen to some people with Parkinson's, and obviously those can contribute to falls risk, and so does fatigue. Many people talk about fatigue being their primary complaint on a day-to-day basis, just feeling tired all the time. When we're really tired, we are less careful, and sometimes it can contribute to falls risk. Next slide, please. So let's talk about some strategies to reduce falls. First and foremost, modify the situations that you put yourself in that are unsafe. You know, you may have always stood your whole life to put on your pants in the morning, but your balance may not allow that anymore. You may need to sit to get dressed and be safe. You might need to give up the ladder or the step stools in the kitchen to reach those high shelves. Climbing is just sometimes an accident waiting to happen because your balance reflexes are not as sharp as they used to be, and getting rid of that clutter on the floor. So those are the modifications you can make. Avoid multitasking. I just said that automatic is broken or reduced in Parkinson's disease. So if you can't put anything on automatic, it's pretty impossible to do multiple things at one time. Try and focus your attention on your movement, particularly if you're experiencing a lot of balance difficulty. You've all heard about the importance of exercise in Parkinson's disease, and this goes to reduce your falls risk as well. They always say with Parkinson's disease that movement is medicine, and there's many research studies that support that when you exercise regularly, you have better function, you have better quality of life, and your Parkinson's may progress more slowly. If your balance warrants it, use an assistive device to help your balance skills. And when I say use an assistive device, it doesn't just mean own one, it means use one. A cane in the closet or a walker in the corner of the room is not going to help your balance and falls risk. So seek a physical therapy referral for an appropriate device. Make sure you get the one that's going to work the best for you. Next slide, please. Other strategies, make sure you get enough rest. You may not be able to go as hard as you used to or as long as you used to with Parkinson's disease. Split things up, and we want you to be active, but we also need to balance that with activity, with rest. Make sure you have a regular bedtime, get enough sleep, and reduce your fatigue level. Because of the vision changes in Parkinson's, you may want to consider using color contrast to help that. Marking the edge of the step with a reflective or colored piece of tape may make it easier to discern the edge of the step. Or marking your chair armrest or a grab bar in the bathroom with a colored piece of tape can signal where your hand placement should be and help minimize some of those vision disturbances. And make sure you get your blood pressure monitored, not only in a seated position, but also have your blood pressure monitored in a standing position. Because if your blood pressure drops when you're standing, that's when you're going to feel dizzy or lightheaded and that's what's going to contribute to falls. Okay, next slide, please. All right, what do we do if someone actually falls? All right, so let's think about that. The very first thing is try not to panic. It's always upsetting when someone has a fall, whether you're the person on the ground or whether you're the helper or the care partner who wants to get that person up. Let's face it, every single person has probably taken a fall sometime in their life. Think about it. What did you think about? Let me get up off the ground and make sure nobody thinks I fell, right? Well, you need to actually give yourself time to rest a moment and make sure there isn't any injury. If you're the care partner assistant and you don't feel able to get the person up and they're in a safe place, you may need them to stay on the ground until help arrives. Get a pillow, get a blanket, make them comfortable, and ask for help. Know when it is safe to assist. Some people can get up from the ground by themselves without a lot of difficulty. A care partner may assist by bringing a straight back chair next to the person so they have something to hang on to as they get up. But the care partner really needs to know the best way to help. Make sure you get some instruction, and otherwise, as a physical therapist, I've suddenly had 2 clients. I've had the person with Parkinson's who's taken a fall, and a care partner who's had a neck, a back, or a shoulder injury because no one told them the best way to help. Have an emergency backup plan. Who are you going to call if you do need help? Is it a nearby neighbor? Is it a relative or friend? Is it an emergency system within your community? Please make sure you think about that in advance and make your backup plan. Next slide, please. Well, let's talk about the team that's going to help you with advice, with recommendations, and with support with all these things. If you have balance changes happening, please think about involving physical and occupational therapists on your team. They're the people who can evaluate your particular situation, figure out which of these contributing factors affect you, and to help you develop a treatment plan around that. They can give you recommendations about the right kind of exercise, and they can help you practice some daily skills in areas where maybe you're mostly experiencing falls risk. They are the experts in finding you the right assistive device. Medicare typically only covers one assistive device every 5 years. Don't get the wrong one. Ask for some assistance in getting the right thing first. Occupational therapists may help you find the right kind of adaptive equipment. You can spend a lot of money on adaptive equipment only to figure out it's not right for you. So get some advice along those lines. Care partners, as I said before, also need instruction. That's a great question for a physical or an occupational therapist. They can help figure out the best way to get up from that person to get up from the ground and the best way for the care assistant to help. And then do a home safety assessment. Therapists can do that either in through home care settings of physical and occupational therapy. Outpatient settings can sometimes send a home safety assessment into your home, checking everything out and making recommendations for equipment and other modifications that can work for you. When you're working with finding a physical or occupational therapist on your team, do try and choose therapists with experience in Parkinson's disease. You may know that if you had a problem with your heart, you would see a cardiologist. You wouldn't see a dermatologist. It's the same thing with physical therapists. Some of them are very experienced and knowledgeable about Parkinson's disease. Others may not be. They may be more focused in orthopedics or sports medicine or pediatrics. Find the right fit for you. Next slide, please. Here are some foundation-related resources from the Parkinson's Foundation that can really help you with all the things that I just talked about. The helpline is there on the screen. You see the number. That's a great place to maybe ask questions if you're seeking some information about who might be an experienced therapist in your area. They may be aware of people with training or the nearest centers of excellence. They have a raft of free resources that really look at falls risk and balance, fact sheets, the Fitness Counts book, which I personally like in terms of getting people started on an exercise program. And for care partners, there's the Caring and Coping book, which has all kinds of recommendations, certainly to reduce falls, but lots of other helpful resources for you as a care partner. There's also been now, particularly during the pandemic time, virtual classes like the Fitness Fridays. Again, another great place to get information and some ideas about regular exercise. All these resources and more can be found at parkinson.org. I hope this has been helpful, and I am going to now turn over the conversation to the next speaker, and I'll be back at the time of the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you, Rose. That was great. It's my pleasure to welcome our second guest speaker now, Danielle Arigoni. Danielle will speak about how AARP's recently revised Home Fit Guide can make your home safer, smarter, and a better fit for all, regardless of your age, ability, or income. Danielle is the director of Livable Communities at AARP, where she works to support AARP's 53 state offices to create great places for all people of all ages. Danielle, welcome.
Thank you, Adolfo, and thank you everyone for having me today. I'm really pleased to be a part of this discussion. Next slide, please. Well, I want to pick up where Rose left off in terms of talking about some of the things that she made reference to in her talk, namely the environmental considerations and factors that can be a barrier to living safely in your home. So I'd like to walk you all through our Home Fit Guide. Next slide, please. Give you a little bit of background as to how it came about and how we think it can be helpful to you. So one of the reasons that we put this guide together at AARP is because we know that the housing stock that we generally see in our communities today is not necessarily a great fit for who we are as a country and how we're changing both demographically and in terms of our tastes and needs. We developed the Home Fit Guide to help individuals and families to think about the home in which they currently reside, or perhaps the home they visit to take care of someone, and think about what are the small and in some cases larger modifications that needed to be undertaken in order to make it a more safe, a more comfortable fit, not just for the people who live there, but also for visitors. We're really trying to think about how we can sort of revise all of the housing stock in the US and make small modifications across the board, irregardless of how old the people are who live in that house, so that it can be a more welcoming place for people of all ages and all abilities. Next slide, please. So the Home Fit Guide is a free resource that you can ask for, that you can order. We developed it again because we recognize that for the most part, the housing that we have in our community today is not the best fit for who we are today. In fact, most housing was built over a generation ago, and it was built for a very particular demographic segment. And for the most part, it was built for families with two parents and maybe two children, where everyone was able-bodied. Those are often constructed as single-family homes, which suits the needs for some of us, but not for all of us. Particularly because we recognize that in 2020, today, the dominant household type, which accounts for about 30% of all households, is actually single adults living alone. And if you add onto that households that are comprised of just two people, that takes you over half of American households are these 1 or 2 person households. Moreover, we are aging as a country. By 2035, 1 in 5 people in the US will be over 65. And in fact, by the year 2034, we'll be comprised as a country more people over the age of 65 than under the age of 18 for the first time ever. So we have this real mismatch between who we are as a country and the kind of housing stock that we see in our communities. Next slide, please. That's particularly evident, I think, when you look at the housing, the number of bedrooms in homes. So this graphic here in the middle illustrates a couple things. One, On the right-hand side, the vertical column, it shows those top two bars equate to about 53%. Those are the number of households that are 1 or 2 person households. However, when you look at the middle section there, and particularly the bottom tier of those little miniature house graphics, when you add those up, it adds up to about 80% of all of our housing stock that is 2, 3, 4, or more bedrooms. So really, this very clearly illustrates, I think, the disconnect between the number of people who live in most households, 1 or 2 people, and the availability of housing that meets those needs. We have very few studio apartments available, very few 1-bedroom apartments available, really, when you think about it, as part of our overall housing stock. So that's just one way. I would say it's just yet another way in which housing is not necessarily built to accommodate the needs of Americans today. Next slide, please. In addition, as I mentioned, we are aging as a country. We will very soon, and in some cases, in some communities, this has already happened, where the number of older adults outpaces the number of children. And we know that in these communities that are increasingly comprised of older adults, there's a very strong desire to age in place. In fact, we know that more than 3/4 of people age 50 and above want to be able to age in their home and in their community. And we started to unpack a little bit about what people look for in their homes and in their communities as they age. Next slide, please. What we find is that certainly we know that people want to age in place, but that desire to age in place increases the older that we get. So when you talk about 50 plus, it's about 50% of people who want to age in place. But when you get up to folks who are 65 and above, more than 2/3 of folks want to be able to stay in the current home and never leave. But at the same time, we acknowledge that it's about 60% of all adults who own their own homes. Yet about 1/3 of those report that in order to stay in their homes, major modifications would be needed in order to accommodate their needs. When you think about what are some of the solutions, how might people adjust and adapt their existing homes to make it a better place for them? Certainly modifications of the type that we'll talk about in Home Fit come to bear, but also when you think about, can you create a home in which adults are more readily able to share with one another? Perhaps by building an accessory dwelling unit, a cottage home, a backyard cottage, a converted garage to make and to create an independent living space for anyone who wants to live there, who wants the independence, but also maybe wants to be closer by to a caregiver or to someone for whom they are providing care. We know that about 1/3, a very small number of households already have an ADU, but about 1/3 of homeowners would like to build one. And the majority of those say that they would want to build one for a loved one who needs care. There's also an increasing interest among older adults in sharing homes. So you think about adult roommates or perhaps an older adult who has a younger adult come in and move into the home and provide some of that support and care and maybe help around the house that makes it easier for them to age in place. So we're really thinking kind of broadly and holistically about what are the changes that are needed, next slide please, in order to help people live in their homes. And this is really where Home Fit comes in. We want people to be able to live safely and comfortably in their home, regardless of housing type, whether it's a home or whether it's a house or an apartment, by really making those interventions, taking on those tasks that can make a home more aging friendly. We also know there's an important role for local leaders and policymakers to play in terms of supporting investments in and incentives for these kinds of changes. Again, we're really thinking about how we can modify the existing housing stock that we've got, starting house by house in each individual's home. How can we begin to convert that housing stock into a place that's better, safer, more comfortable for people of all ages and all abilities? Next slide, please. So let's look inside and let's give you a sense of what you'll find when you order this document. It's available for free in download, or you can request a print copy to be sent to you. Inside, you'll find more than 100 room-by-room tips that are applicable to all housing types. We've included detailed illustrations and explanations of how a smartly designed or modified home can meet the current needs of its current residents, but also the future needs of existing residents or visitors. And really, we include a range of solutions from the do-it-yourself solutions to improvements that need skilled expertise. So there really is something in here for everyone. Next slide, please. We've made some recent changes, as Adolfo mentioned. This is a reprint, a reproduction of and a reinvestment in this home fit guide that we did just this year with a few specific changes in mind. One, we wanted to make it more inclusive in terms of being able to include actions that could be done by renters or by owners. We all live in a home of some kind, you know, God willing. Not all of us own our home, and yet there's still things that you can do even if you're a renter in your home. Again, we want to make sure that these changes were adaptable and doable, whether you live in an apartment or a house or in a manufactured home. There's no one type of home that is naturally more well suited to this philosophy, if you will. It can in fact be brought to bear in all different housing types. And we wanted to make sure that it was as inclusive as possible. And that means inclusive from a cultural tradition as well. So we were very mindful about including ideas and narratives that spoke to the different cultural traditions that we see in our country. And to really double down on that, we are producing the document in several languages, including Spanish, Chinese, Korean, and Vietnamese. So they'll all be available in print and download in those formats. We also included more information on smart home tech. So things like Amazon Echo or Alexa or Google Nest. These are all interesting items that are new on the scene that really can play a role if done well and done carefully in helping homes become a better fit for people. And certainly we wanted this document to not just speak to those people who were encountering physical disabilities or who were really encountering some difficulty that comes with aging, but we really wanted to expand the frame and say, this is a framework that benefits all ages. Whether you are fearful of fall risk, whether you are struggling with stamina or frailty, or whether you are a parent of a young child and having to juggle groceries and a young toddler, many of these strategies help all of us to move through our homes in a more safe way. And that was part of the change that we wanted to make this time around. Next slide, please. So we're about to look inside the guide. And before we do that, I want to do a quick poll. So this gives you a sense of what the document looks like, but I want to understand from you all. We mentioned earlier, Rose queried you earlier on the fall risks that you've experienced. What part of your home presents the greatest risk for falls for you? Is it outside the front door? Is it your entrance or front foyer? Your kitchen, your bathroom, your bedroom, your living room, your hallway, garage, or laundry room? And that might be a difficult list to choose from, but pick the one that you think presents the greatest risk. I can't promise that we'll go through all of these today, but we will touch on a few of them. So go ahead and submit your answer now, and we'll share the results in just a second. So again, what part of your house presents the greatest risk for falls? Interesting. Okay, so the majority here, about a third of you, say that the bathroom is the place where you are most likely to experience falls. I think that makes a lot of sense, particularly with wet surfaces. There really are a lot of risks that are inherent in the bathroom space. But interestingly, it's pretty well spread across the others: outside the front door, inside the front entrance, in the kitchen, in the bedroom, in the garage. So we'll touch on a few of those rooms as we go through. So thank you for your answers. Next slide, please. So let's start with outside. The Home Fit Guide talks about a number of strategies that can be deployed. Again, some of these require, investment, but others do not. But we know that some of the things that can be done from an exterior standpoint to make your home safer, the most important thing that can be done is a zero-step entrance. That means that you're either making modifications to the actual threshold, whether it's a small threshold ramp. It could mean that you're installing a temporary or permanent ramp. But it could also mean that you're thinking about how to landscape your front entrance so that there aren't any steps to get to your front door. Maybe you're creating a more gradual landscaped ramp and walkway up to that front door. But that zero-step entry is such a critical part of making a home a better fit for you. Again, the goals here are safety and practicality. For those of you who live in a place with 10 steps up to the front door, it's a lot more challenging than those of you who live with one. But nevertheless, a zero-step entry just has to happen somewhere in your home. It doesn't have to be the front door. It can be a back door. It can be a garage. Next slide, please. Once you get inside, we want to think about what is that space where you land. Oh, I'm sorry, one more slide on the outside. Before you actually enter your home, there we go, perfect. Let's think about the front door and what do you see there available to you as you open the front door. From the resident's standpoint, we know that peepholes and doorbells are very important. Now there's video doorbells even that allow you to open the door, unlock the door for a visitor without having to get up from the inside, if that's installed on the exterior of your front door. Also thinking about what sort of handles and locks are in place. So again, we all know that lever handles are much easier to utilize than knob handles for anyone who has difficulty gripping, anyone who has arthritic pain, or frankly is just juggling a lot of things that they're carrying. Those lever handles really make a big difference. But again, with smart home technology, now we have things like digital door locks where you can punch in a code rather than fumbling for a key that needs to go into a lock. Lots of options here in how we think about the front door to your home. And now, next slide, please. Once you get inside, let's think about what that entry space looks like, what that foyer looks like, and how can we prepare that in a way that minimizes risks and increases safety and comfort. One of the things that we certainly learned in our revision of this Home Fit Guide was that, again, with some cultural traditions, it is customary to remove your shoes once you step inside the home. If you don't have an appropriate place to store those shoes, if you don't have an appropriate place to set down your bags or your mails or your key, that can generate a lot of hazards right inside your front door that could be avoided. So we talk in the Home Fit Guide about having useful furniture that serves multiple places. Again, a place to sit down and put your shoes on or remove your shoes. Ways and locations to hang things so that they don't end up on the floor and presenting that trip hazard that we heard about earlier. Next slide, please. When we talked a little bit about smart home technology and these virtual home assistants, I think there's a lot of promise that comes with this new technology. Things that allow you to do more in your home without having to move about your home. Things like turn the TV on and off, dial into video calls or online meetings, queue up your music or get a podcast going, control lights and appliances or do online research. Smart home technology can also help you adjust your thermostats and even lock and unlock doors, as I mentioned before. But also it's convenience factors like helping you make shopping lists or even place phone calls or provide reminders about prescriptions that need to be taken. So we always offer a word of caution here with smart home technology. There are some privacy concerns to be aware of, but that doesn't eliminate the value that they can potentially offer to you in your home. So we talk about that in the guide as well. Next slide, please. When it comes to the kitchen, several people mentioned the kitchen as a potential area of risk. We know that things like lighting become incredibly important. When you think about your heavy work areas, whether it's the stove or the sink or where you're cutting vegetables, having lighting that is well positioned, that helps you see what you're doing, particularly with the contrasts that are required that Rose mentioned, that becomes really important. So lighting becomes an important part of making a kitchen more fit for the users. So too does lower level cabinetry and pull-out shelves. Obviously, this is a little bit harder to do, takes a little bit more effort, but anything that avoids you climbing up steps or climbing onto a ladder to get those high storage areas, that's going to help make sure that your kitchen is a better place. Things like open shelving for visibility and using drawers to maximize space. These are all little techniques that can be utilized in a kitchen to make it a better place for all. Next slide, please. Hallways and stairways, again, this is a really important part of making a home comfortable. It's not a room per se, but it's so incredibly important. Making sure that you have ample clearance so that you can get down the hallway, particularly if you're carrying baggage or if you're using a walker or assistive device of some kind. Handrails are incredibly important, and I love Rose's idea about using colored tape to make sure that those are visible. Being mindful of carpeting. Carpeting is a real challenge. If you insist upon using rugs, area rugs, whether it's for cultural traditions or for aesthetic reasons, make sure that you're securing it and taping it down solidly and securely. We often believe, many of us believe that, the best thing is just to remove it altogether because those area rugs really can present a challenge. but also thinking about installing motion sensor night lights, particularly on stairways and in hallways. If you do have stairs in your homes, how can you deploy treads or runners or tape, to Rose's point again, to clearly delineate the edge of those stair thresholds? And then thinking about riser covers and how that can, again, eliminate just one more potential risk of falling. Next slide, please. I'm really happy to say that, well, I should say, I only gave you a quick overview and a quick flavor of what's in the guide. There's a lot more in there, including bathrooms, which we did not talk about. But I'm also happy to say that the guide is available for free. You can download it directly from this website, aarp.org/homefit. You can also go to that website and request a free copy. We'll have one sent to you to your home for free. But at the same time, we've also deployed a new augmented reality tool that's available now in the App Store. It's called HomeFit AR. So if you go to your App Store, you'll find it identified as such. And what that lets you do is it holds your camera over a room, including your bathroom, your kitchen, or your bedroom, and it will probe you for questions to ask different elements of your bathroom, of your kitchen, of your bedroom, and it will make suggestions on how to make that space better, safer, more comfortable. So that's another resource I encourage you all to check out. And then finally, I wanted to make sure that you all knew that our AARP Foundation, sort of our sister organization, has released something called Here to Stay, Home Upkeep for All, which is a guide to help residents plan for basic home maintenance that can ensure that their home is safer, more comfortable, and a better fit for them over the long haul as well. I think that's my last slide. So with that, I'll thank you, and look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Danielle. Excellent information and great tips. So with that, we would like to leave the rest of our time for questions that have come in through the chat. We have quite a few. We probably will not be able to get to all of them. So if those that we do not, you can certainly contact the Parkinson's Foundation helpline at 1-800-473-4636, which spells out 1-800-4PD-INFO. So our first question, just a clarification one that came through, Danielle, is I know you explained this, but if you could explain once again, what is an ADU?
Yeah, an ADU it stands for accessory dwelling unit. And what that means is it's a fairly clunky way of describing something that has historically been a part of our community. And those are those backyard conversions. They might be a cottage house, a carriage house, an alleyway house, but these are the smaller units that historically have existed in communities. Sometimes they are a physical part of the home. So it can mean in DC, for example, English basements, where you convert the basement of your apartment into an independent unit. Many communities convert garages or make it possible for garages or attics to be converted into apartments. The colloquial term is mother-in-law units or granny flats, which I don't love from an ageism standpoint, but that's what we mean by ADUs. And they really do offer a lot of opportunity, I think, for different housing solutions going forward.
Great. And then we have kind of a somewhat related question, which is, are there specific programs that can help cover costs or expenses? I know some of the things are sort of do-it-yourself type hacks, but that you can do, or have a friend or a relative, but obviously some other things like doorway modifications and things like that. So contractor.
Yeah, the Here to Stay guide that I mentioned that AARP Foundation did actually not only does it document repair priorities, but it also connects you with local resources and funding streams, funding programs that can help you make those modifications. So it may not have an answer for every community all across the country, but the Here to Stay guide was designed to help individuals be able to access and identify what resources exist in their communities, whether it's loan programs or Habitat for Humanity type programs that you can sign up for to get some help to get those projects done.
Great. Okay, and now we have some questions for Rose. Rose, you've mentioned several times about enlisting a physical therapist or an occupational therapist. Could you briefly explain what would be the difference? When do you call the physical therapist? When do you call the occupational therapist? Who does what?
Sure, good question. Physical therapists probably would be the person you would call if you are experiencing changes in your walking pattern. If you're thinking about development of an exercise program, or if you're looking for the right kind of assistive device to help you in your walking pattern. An occupational therapist, they're kind of the kings and queens of what we call ADLs, or activities of daily living. If you're experiencing balance problems and falls because when you're getting dressed, or difficulty getting in and out of the shower, or perhaps trying to find more safety as you move about in your kitchen, those are excellent times to be connecting with an occupational therapist who can provide you with certainly possibly exercise, but also some strategies and maybe some adaptations to make your daily life easier.
So Rose, we also had someone asking about adaptive and assistive devices. And they say, we have a 4-wheel walker and a 3-wheel walker for smaller spaces. We also have rails on the bed, grab bars in the bathroom, as well as a pole with an S-grab by an elevated toilet. However, it seems that we still have difficulty moving from the bedroom to the living room to the lift chair. Is there anything else that you can think of or ideas to aid that travel inside the home between rooms?
Well, that question would probably have multiple answers depending on the current setup of your home. And I would ask, as a physical therapist, many questions about that. And I would suggest working with a therapist if you have the opportunity to do so. It may have to do with time of day. Are you having more difficulty moving at certain times than others, which many people with Parkinson's do, relating to their medication schedule? Some people need completely different sets of strategies for when they're feeling on and moving well with their medications versus when they're off. There are such things as other kinds of transports, mechanical kinds of lifts, other kinds of things that can be added in a home. They do involve some expense, but they can work out well for many, many people. So without knowing the exact situation, it may be very difficult to answer the question specifically, but it certainly sounds like something that perhaps a home assessment with a physical therapist or an occupational therapist for equipment recommendations might be in order.
Okay, great, thank you, Rose. And then this question, I think probably maybe Danielle and Rose will both want to weigh in on. The question is, hard floors or carpet? So someone is saying he prefers the carpet because it's softer, but I'm wondering if a hard floor would ease in walking movements with his walker. But at the same time, they're very concerned that they may start walking too fast on the hard floor.
From a risk standpoint, I think hard floor is the better choice. Carpets, can be a long, thick pile. It can present, opportunities to even catch your toes if you're walking barefoot. So arguably, hard floors present less risk from that standpoint. But I think Rose has an interesting perspective to offer as well.
Well, I would certainly agree with that, Danielle. I think probably a hard floor surface might have the least amount of risk. Having said that, I know many people prefer carpet in their home environment. I would think a lot about the pile of the carpet, making sure it's a rather low pile carpet, making sure the padding of the carpet isn't too soft and squishy under the carpet itself. And really removing the no-no of all time, the throw rugs out of the situation, because that's just an accident waiting to happen. I've always said I want a nickel for every time I've taken a throw rug up out of the home environment. I would have retired years ago.
Excellent. And Rose, you mentioned about proper footwear in one of your slides, the importance of that. So we have someone here who's saying, my daughter keeps telling me I need to wear different shoes, but I have worn high heels all of my life. I can't simply not wear flats. Is there any particular type of shoe or style that you would recommend?
Well, the high heels are a very difficult thing, and they're very difficult to give up, because I know that when you're used to high heels, it is very difficult to not wear high heels. couple things I would ask about. I would ask about the lowest heel possible and the size of the heel of the shoe. I would really advise against high heels, but I know some people really insist on wearing a higher heeled shoe. And if you've worn high heels your whole life, you might find that your calf muscles are a little bit tighter and that it might be difficult to walk in flat shoes right away. So you might need to think a little bit about some stretching exercises for those ankles before you really think about making major changes in your shoes.
Thank you. And Danielle, what is an easier way to modify a zero entry shower when the floor wasn't graded to help keep the water out?
I mean, those are often big ticket items, right? I mean, I think we know that there are pre-built, pre-formulated shower inserts that can be created, but often that means removing the bathtub entirely. So these are not a weekend project that you can do yourself. I'd probably encourage you to talk to a contractor about what your options are. But I will say that, you know, for all of the sort of mythology around zero entry showers and the fact that maybe wasn't pleasing from an aesthetic standpoint, you know, that's the choice of showers when you go into high-end hotels these days, or when people used to go to high-end hotels. You know, it's those sort of walk-in showers that are becoming increasingly popular. So they can be a beautiful solution as well as a really functional solution.
We're getting kind of close to the end of our time. So I'm just going to pose a kind of a final wrap-up question to each of you. And if there's only one takeaway that our viewers and listeners can take with them or follow through on regarding being safer at home and avoiding falls, what would that be? Rose?
Boy, one takeaway is a tough one, and it's partially.
Or maybe two or three.
Maybe two. I think.
So what's the single most important thing that comes to mind if you do nothing else?
I think the most single thing that I would suggest is to really think about what are the potential factors for you. As I said at the beginning, people with Parkinson's fall for a variety of reasons, and we have to kind of find the answers as to why the falls may be occurring to know what the best choices might be in making those modifications. So really thinking about all the contributing factors we've talked about today, thinking which ones may impact you the most, and then taking steps in those particular areas.
Great, thank you. Danielle?
I'll do a couple. One, I'll do a shameless plug for the guide. I would say one important thing, request the guide and spend some time looking through it. Again, you can find that at aarp.org/homefit. So that's one thing to do. Two is, I think, take out those area rugs and those throw rugs per Rose's advice. And really carefully think about, do you need those in your home? And if you do, secure them. But if you can dispense of them, please do. And then the third thing is, I really think that lighting can be a critically important and relatively low cost change to make. Thinking about putting in stronger bulbs or realigning lamps or floor lamps or even task lighting to better illuminate places where you're working or walking or moving. I think that often you don't realize how poorly lit a space is until you encounter a fall. And I think that's some easy preemptive preparedness work that we could all do.
Great, thank you. And as Rose mentioned in the beginning when she talked about Parkinson's providing many factors involved in increasing this risk, we strongly encourage you to look at towards not only the Home Fit Guide, but as well as our helpline at the Parkinson's Foundation, the 1-800-473-4636. We have a wonderful team of information specialists that can help guide you, answer questions, and really address many of these other factors and guide you to not only resources, but what you can do and things you should be discussing with your physicians and your other healthcare providers to address all of these factors before they become a problem. So again, we've got up on the screen here, you can see the various resources at the foundation that are available. You can order these by contacting our helpline number, We've also got expert briefing webinars on various topics that come up. The AARP Living Communities. You can stay in touch and visit their website for more information. Thank you so much, Rose and Danielle, for all of your information, the time. Thank you to everyone for viewing and participating in today's webinar. We do ask you, please, before you sign off, that we are going to have a last slide. You're going to see a survey feedback slide at the end of our webinar. It's going to pop up on your screen. Your feedback is very, very important to us. As we mentioned, this was just the second in a series of webinars as part of this new partnership, and we're looking forward to ideas and suggestions for new and future topics. Once again, the webinar is being recorded for on-demand viewing, and it'll be available in approximately 48 hours. You'll be notified with an email as soon as that is available for viewing again. Thank you once again for being with us today, and we look forward to connecting soon. Take care, everybody.